against Bitcoin.
It's going up forever.
You're against Bitcoin, you're against freedom.
Tried to talk, you were at a Bitcoin conference, and this was our cryptocurrency conference, and that was where the former President Trump was speaking and fundraising, and we've been asking this question on the show. Why Bitcoin? Why now? Why crypto assets? What's sort of the motivation to really embrace a network of crypto assets and become the preeminent network on the planet? From a Republican sort of stance, is this something that is concrete, and why?
Lisa, I think this is something that has evolved over time. I first began looking into crypto in the previous administration in 2018. That was my first engagement. I initially started at a point of skepticism, as I think many of my colleagues do. But when I began to understand the underlying technology and realizing the potential for dramatic productivity gains, what I thought to myself is we need to make certain that it happens here in America. The last thing we want is to see what happened with the semiconductor industry, where it got pushed offshore and weakened us from a geopolitical standpoint. We need to see this innovation happening here. I've been in many conversations with President Trump. His thinking is likewise involved, and he's embracing the fact that this has tremendous potential for America. We want it to evolve here. We want to create the ecosystem for it to thrive here. And the last thing we need to do is push it offshore. However, the current administration has done everything they can to attack this industry, to push it offshore, again, to use the SEC, the CFTC, every tool at their disposal to come in and attack this industry and refuse to provide it with any type of regulatory framework. President Trump made the statement at the Bitcoin conference that one of the first things he'll do is change out the administration's leadership. Gary Gensler, he said, will be fired. That brought people to their feet in applause. He's going to end Operation Choke Point that's been taking place in the crypto industry here in America. And he's going to try to create the environment here where the industry can thrive, and we'll see the next wave of innovation happening right here in America.
Yo, welcome to Simply Bitcoin Live, your number one source for the peaceful Bitcoin revolution, breaking news, culture, and manic warfare. We will be your guide through the separation of money and states. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, enjoy the ride. Welcome to the most watched daily Bitcoin live show on YouTube, Rumble, and X, Simply Bitcoin Live. Anyways, absolutely crazy. In the halls of Congress, Bitcoin is being talked about, and you know that senator is basically seeing the writing on the wall. If you don't want Bitcoin and Bitcoin entrepreneurs to build it out here in America, they're going to do it overseas. And I think China had a little bit of a taste of that. And, you know, they walked it back a little bit. They're using Hong Kong kind of like this proxy to, you know, try to take some of the Bitcoin industry back into China. But at the same time, not letting it into mainland China. But he's, you know, it's obvious, like you can't ban yourself from Bitcoin. There's Opti's quote. You can't ban yourself from Bitcoin. You can only, no, you can't ban Bitcoin. You can only ban yourself from Bitcoin. And I think it's incredibly obvious. And something that Jack Mallers actually said at a BPI summit in DC, said, you want Bitcoiners paying taxes here in Texas. You don't want them paying taxes in Dubai. Right. And that's something that's really important for politicians. And I think they don't quite understand, which is this idea of like, look, if you push it too far, you know, I could take my wealth with me by writing down 12 words, 24 words, you know, crossing a border, you know, taking it all with me. Like you can't really stop that. Right. So I think I think politicians are playing with fire. And then it's a question. It's like, do you want the United States to continue dominating worldwide? And I think that's something that Trump, even though he doesn't fully understand Bitcoin completely, and that senator, I think that senator definitely understands Bitcoin a little bit more than Trump, but they're just using common sense. Like, it's like, we want, you know, this industry to innovate and to really build itself out here in the US. We don't want this to happen overseas. And here's the thing, when different nation states and different countries start competing for your business as an individual, as a citizen, you win, right? That's the dynamics that you want to happen. Another thing also, this is I saw a tweet by Nick Carter earlier in the day, and it was basically along the lines of, it was probably not a good idea to tie, you know, Bitcoin to the election of Donald Trump, because now we're seeing Kamala Harris really rise in the polls. You know, the betting odds, it's getting closer and closer. Trump's losing like 10%. 15 days ago, it seemed like the Trump election was a slam dunk. It doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. And then think about it, right? Obviously a lot of it was very pro-Republican at the Bitcoin conference. There was some members of the Democratic Party that were there, but imagine that. Imagine if we have another Democratic administration. Now, does this mean that it's going to stop Bitcoin? Of course not. Bitcoin's existed under various administrations, the vast majority of them being Democratic. And you could say that a lot of these administrations have taken a hostile stance towards Bitcoin. But what I got to say is that now I think Bitcoin's like evolving. Now Bitcoin's like exiting the shadow realm and entering the mainstream. And I think this is where politicians, specifically during the transitionary period, could do a lot of damage to the industry from, an entrepreneurial perspective, from a regulatory perspective, not from a individuals taking Bitcoin into self-custody. Like, they could make your life hell, but you can just get up and go to El Salvador or go to another Bitcoin friendly country. So that doesn't scare me, but yeah, they definitely can make the life of Bitcoiners extremely inconvenient here in the United States. And also another news, something that I want to talk about as well, is this idea of a central bank digital currency, which seems to be dead on arrival here in the US, but it's a bit of a bait and switch. Why am I saying that? Well, it seems like they're going full steam ahead with the stable coins. The stable coins are something that actually Donald Trump mentioned by name during his speech. So of course, I'm talking about USDC and USDT, which is the Tether stable coin, and then the Coinbase stable coin. And now here's the thing about those stable coins. They still, both Tether and Coinbase, because they're inherently centralized, do work with law enforcement to seize and freeze the coins of anyone law enforcement or the state wants to freeze, right? So it's not exactly a CBDC. I would say it's better than a CBDC because it's not inherently controlled by the state. It's still a third party, but still, it has a lot of CBDC characteristics, right? And, Mark Goodwin and Whitney Webb, they were talking about this a lot, about how it's the stable coins that we have to worry about. It's not necessarily the CBDC. So that's the question that I have for you guys. Are the stable coins the CBDCs? I don't know. We'll talk about it. Also, the thing that I want to talk about today, the headliner, is Cynthia Lummis yesterday finally introduces her historic bill, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve legislation. This is something that she mentioned after Trump's speech. A lot of people were focusing on Trump's speech, but it was a really clever political maneuver, really, because you had Donald Trump, saying, free Ross, I'm going to fire Gary Gensler, under my administration, we're not going to sell any Bitcoin. And then shortly after, you had Cynthia Lummis going harder in the paint. So she was basically saying, we're going to buy up to $1 million worth. We're going to buy up to 1 million Bitcoin. We're not going to sell it. This is going to become a strategic reserve of the United States. And the way that they did it was really clever, because if Trump said that, that would have been used by the media to go after him and be like, Trump's crazy. He's quote unquote buying crypto. Like, don't elect this guy. And anyone doesn't know the truth about Bitcoin or the difference between Bitcoin and Doge would have seen that in a negative light. So what they did is they brought out the Bitcoin senator, Cynthia Lummis, shortly after the Trump speech, very, very quickly after the Trump speech. And she said the quiet part out. She's like, okay, strategic Bitcoin reserve asset. Here's this act. I'm introducing the Bitcoin Act. This is what it's all about. And we're going to get into all the details of that today. That is absolutely historic, because if they do pull this off, first of all, the longevity of it is going to be a lot greater than if Trump did it via executive order. That would only last 4 years, right? But if they do it the proper way, which is through the legislative process, then, it has more longevity, right? It doesn't matter who's president. It's into law. It's enacted into law, right? Also, some texts in the laws were mentioning the fact that it was going to be public. They were going to make the ledger public, proof of reserve. So I think that's very awesome. And now I know a lot of Bitcoiners are inherently, they don't really feel good about this. Why? They don't want the state holding on to more Bitcoin. I'd agree with that. But also from a number go up perspective, like, holy shit, would that pump the bags if we just heard the US government is going to use that money printer to buy 1 million Bitcoin? That would just make the price go into, it would go beyond the moon. It'd go to Mars or something. So anyways, we're going to talk about that. Really, really bullish on the price a little bit bearish in the sense that now this is a Bitcoin election. So, I think if Trump gets into office, it will be bullish. And if Kamala gets into office, it's going to be bearish. Maybe that's something that we should have looked at, and maybe that's something that we should have looked at. But at the same time, did we really have a choice? Because they just kept upping the hostility, like locking us in a box, locking Bitcoin privacy developers in a box, going after Roger Ver. Like, did we really have a choice but not throw our hat in the ring and say, you know what, like, what's going on here? Bitcoiners never made this political. The Biden administration made this political with all the actions they took. Operation Choke Point 2.0, the proposed Bitcoin mining tax, and of course, the hostility towards Bitcoin developers. And then, of course, the attack on self-custody. Like, did we really have a choice but to get in the ring and be like, you know what, like, enough's enough. We're going to get behind a political candidate that's actually going to protect us. Like, I don't know if we had a choice on this, but yeah, I think this election is going to have consequences for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin entrepreneurs in the United States. Is it going to stop the movement? Absolutely not. We are unstoppable. I do want to bring up Opti on, and of course, our special guest. We got Mitchell from Blockware Solutions, and of course, my legendary co-host Optimus Fields. What are we going to talk about during the culture, brother?
Well, we got everyone's favorite Zoomer out here, the author of The Conservative Case for Bitcoin. So, of course, today is going to be, I think, a very politics and Bitcoin infused show, which, I know Bitcoiners love to hate on politics, but I think Mitch is going to come on and explain to us, especially from a Zoomer's perspective, why it is so important for Bitcoiners to engage with politics. And this is where we are, guys. Love it or hate it. This is the part of the story where we are, where politics is starting to care about Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. So I think Mitch is going to give us some sauce here from a younger perspective, which I think is probably the clear perspective here on many things. But, Nico, I do want to chime in here. I'm starting to flip-flop here. I think I'm going to go full Kamala Harris. Let's accelerate this. We need to see the final battle. Kamala Harris for president, because this is going to eventually be good for Bitcoin, because they can fight us all they want. Can't stop it. So I mean, hey, let's go accelerate, Nico.
I mean, bro, Kamala Harris, dude. Oh my God, it would just be like from an accelerationist standpoint, like the fall, like absolutely bullish on that perspective. From a being a Bitcoin entrepreneur in the United States, it would be very bad. It would be very bearish. So yeah, I mean, and then in regards to the conversation about politics, this is something that I always hear from like our audience, rightly so, because you guys are Bitcoiners, which is like, what the fuck's going on? Well, what is the definition of politics? The definition of politics is the organization of power, right? And as of course, if Bitcoin plays more and more of an influence in society, then of course it was going to get into the political discussion, the power discussion. That's incredibly obvious. That was always going to happen. Look, all the bankers have those politicians in their pockets, right? Like they already do that. So why can't our industry have a powerful donor base as well? Like, isn't that, like, in my opinion, it's obvious that was inevitably going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you saw the same sort of commentary around the ETF. It's like, we don't need these guys. We don't want Wall Street. It's like, if Bitcoin was ever going to become the global reserve asset of the world, if it was going to have a 10, 20, $50 trillion market cap, these guys were going to come in. Wall Street was going to come in. The politicians were going to come in. And this sort of libertarian utopian society with no state, that will never exist. So I would rather the politicians be quote unquote bought off by Bitcoiners than to be bought off by the bankers, straight up.
100%. I mean, that is the way that the game is played. I do agree with you 100%, Mitchell, where yes, we have this libertarian utopian vision of society where the state disintegrates altogether. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the role of the state definitely could be greatly diminished in society for sure, but just the total evaporation of the state altogether, I think is incredibly naive to think that will happen. But in the best case scenario, yes, you do want the men with guns, right, to be on the side of Bitcoiners rather than the men with guns be against the Bitcoiners, right? Just gonna say that. Anyways, I do want to give a shout out to our lead sponsor. Of course, I'm talking about Bitcoin Well. Guys, Bitcoin Well is the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. Buy real Bitcoin, enable your independence with the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin in Canada and the USA. To get started, all you got to do is you put in your email address, and the sign-up process takes about 2 to 3 minutes. By the way, every time you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, it's automatic self-custody. What does that mean? That means that you can't leave Bitcoin on the platform. You have to put your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address, and when the funds clear, it goes straight from Bitcoin Well straight to your self-custody wallet address, which perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state, because self-custody is the revolution. Anyways, every time you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, you earn Bitcoin Well points, and you could redeem those points towards the Bitcoin Wishing Well contest. So we're going to do that right now. We're going to toss a coin into the Bitcoin Wishing Well. Get your Lightning wallets ready, and first person to scan the QR code wins 500 sats. By the way, if you use promo code simplybtc to sign up to bitcoinwell.com today, you get 3 tosses into the Bitcoin Wishing Well for an opportunity to win up to 1 million Satoshis. All right, everybody, let's get to the numbers. We have lots to talk about. Let's check it out.
The Bitcoin numbers.
I do want to give a shout out to Stamp Seed. Guys, don't write down your seed phrase on paper. That's a terrible idea. That's a great way to lose your generational wealth. You want to hammer them in letter by letter, proof of work, seed phrase storage into frickin' titanium. So the Stamp Seed is a professional metal stamping toolkit. It's titanium, one solid piece, one small form factor, no loose pieces. More pieces equal more points of failure. Of course, it's incredibly easy to hide. Buy the kit, get as many plates as you need, and of course, you can use the holes on the Stamp Seeds to mount the plate into your wall under a desk, or you can cover the plates as well. So this is a great way, guys. I would say it's the best way to stamp your seed into titanium. Stamp your seed into titanium to ensure generational wealth. Don't write your seed words on paper. Don't be that person. You want to put it into titanium. So get yourself a Stamp Seed storage kit today. Use promo code SIMPLY to get 15% off. At the time of recording, the Bitcoin price is 62,800 sats per dollar, 1,593. Block height, 854,975. Blocks to halving, 195,025. Halving estimate, March 20th, 2028. Total Lightning Network capacity, 4,716 Bitcoin. Capacity value, 296 million. Realized monetary inflation, 1.48%. Market capitalization, 1.24 trillion. Bitcoin versus gold market cap. It's just getting started, 7.35%. In the grand scheme of things, Bitcoin is still a baby. Anyways, I do want to talk about the cbdc's. This is something that we've talked about a lot on Simply Bitcoin. We've always made the case that you're going to have 2 options. Option number 1 is Bitcoin, freedom, opportunity, peace, prosperity. Option number 2 is fiat, central bank digital currencies, nihilism, slavery, endless wars, all of that bad stuff. Now, I think we've done such a great job in the internet warfare side of things, because we have literally CBDC, just bringing up CBDC in a conversation is just so unpopular at this point. You see Trump bringing it up not only at the Bitcoin conference, but on his rallies. And he said, look, if you elect me into office, I'll make sure a CBDC never happens. And you just see the crowd roaring to the point that it surprised Trump the first time he said it. So I think that term CBDC has been othered. It's not popular. People are awake to it. So they're doing a little bit of a bait and switch. In Europe, we already seen, they're not calling it a central bank digital currency in Europe anymore. They're just calling it digital currency, right? They're calling it the digital euro, right? It doesn't seem as ominous anymore. It doesn't seem as evil. There's no central bank in there. It's just, oh, this is just the digital euro. What are you talking about, right? So they did a little bit of a bait and switch in the marketing so that people wouldn't pay attention. But we have to stay on our toes. We have to stay aware of what is happening. Here's Jerome Powell being interviewed, and let's check out what he has to say.
And so we have people who are researching that and trying to keep up to speed, because we play an important role in the payments sector, both as a convener and as an operator too. In terms of a CBDC, there's really nothing new going on. There's not much going on at all. We don't have the authority to issue a retail CBDC that's available to the public. We're not seeking that authority. So what we're doing is keeping up with developments there. Pretty much every major central bank in the world is at least doing that. Some of them are actually seriously looking at implementing a CBDC. We're really not. We're really just evaluating, the story and what's happening out there. I think it's work that we need to be doing which could be very beneficial down the road. But we don't have on a CBDC. We don't have any plan. We would need to go to Congress, and we have no plan to do that. No one here has decided that we think it's a good idea.
And here's the thing: it's unviable right now. You have the House and the Senate; they're divided. Good luck passing this in Congress. So they did a little bit of a bait and switch. They found a clever roundabout way, and that clever roundabout way is, why do we need that if we have Tether? Here is the chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald. He actually had a speech in Nashville. And by the way, I do want to mention something about Tether. I do believe that Tether, especially in the developing world where they don't have access to stable currencies, is actually a good thing. And I actually think it's a Trojan horse towards Bitcoin. I think it gets people used to using a currency that is not issued by the state. So in my opinion, I think Tether is is positive, but it's just something that we have to keep in mind of, that Tether is not a replacement towards Bitcoin. If anything, Tether functions as a stepping stone towards Bitcoin, but Tether is not a replacement. And that warning is more so to people overseas that are using Tether in the day-to-day, because as Tether gains more in popularity, that means that there's going to be more pressure from governments and nation states put on Tether, and Tether isn't going to have an option but to say, you know what, we're going to go along with it because inherently it's a centralized entity. They don't have a choice, right? So anyways, let's check out what the chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald had to say.
Equivocal. Okay? Tether does what it says it does. It has one-to-one. It's onboarded with 150 law enforcement agencies around the world. Why do I know that? Because when we formed our relationship with them, we helped them onboard those institutions. We helped them do it. As you all know, every transaction on the blockchain is traceable, and Tether will seize any amount of coin that is involved in illicit activity. They will be caught. So whoever said things about Tether, they're knowingly false, they know it's wrong, and it needs to go away. All right, so why do I care about all this stuff, right? I run Cantor Fitzgerald. Why do I care? Because I care about America and dollar hegemony, the dollar being everywhere in the world. So you've got $100+ billion held in Argentina, Venezuela, and Turkey. If we go to a taxi right now in Argentina and try to pay, they'll take Tether. If you go to Turkey and go to a grocer, they'll take Tether because they don't want the local fiat currency, because we all know it devalues massively. So I care about the 300 million wallets that hold Tether, because those 300 million wallets are financing the U.S. Treasury's debt, right? They're buying, every time someone buys Tether, Tether buys a Treasury bill, and we're financing the U.S. Treasury's debt. So emerging market distribution of USDT is fundamental for backing our debt in our country, which helps us live in this beautiful way. So let me talk Bitcoin for a little bit.
I mean, saying the quiet part out loud, right? This is completely, law enforcement. We can confiscate it at a flick of a switch. This is being adopted on a worldwide basis. Tether is being used. Tether, buys, U.S. Treasury bill, the bonds, and that helps, pay for the debt, right? So it's like this, never-ending cycle. And then you'd say, Nico, why don't they care about the CBDC anymore? It's like Jerome Powell's basically saying, we don't really need it. They don't really need one anymore, right? Like, this is a better situation for them, I would say. Like, they get the best of both worlds. It's like Tether goes and helps the US government pay off its debt. And also Tether can just freeze anyone's Tether wallet, right? It's best of both worlds. Remember the episode that I did yesterday when Russia announced that they was going to be using Bitcoin to facilitate international trade? I said the current US sanctioned policy is not compatible with Bitcoin because Bitcoin's an open monetary network, right? That's not the case with Tether. You can continue US sanctioned policy with Tether, which is why I believe they've kind of backed off the CBDC. Like, on a marketing perspective, it's tainted. You can't do it anymore, but they can still kind of get their way in this sense. Anyways, here is Paolo Ardino, and he says, Tether's Q2 2024 station is out. Another great quarter. A short summary as of 30 June 2024. $1.3 billion in net operating profit. 520 million increase in Tether's group-owned equity. 5.33 billion in excess reserves, more than 97.5 billion in US treasuries, $7 billion increase from the previous quarter, a new all-time high. This achievement brings Tether exposure to treasuries above Germany, the UAE, and Australia. While China and other countries have been recent net sellers of US Treasury, Tether positions itself at 18th in the ranking of countries owning US debt. And of course, 80,000 Bitcoin owned by Tether's group. So, I mean, like, bro, like, I would say Tether is, I would say it's not a CBDC the way that we defined a CBDC. But look, like, 18th biggest buyer of US debt. They hold 80,000 Bitcoin. It could be used by law enforcement. I mean, like, of course, it now makes perfect sense why the US government isn't pursuing a CBDC. They don't need to. Now, again, I think I would say it's a Trojan horse. Personally, I like the Tether guys. I like what Tether is doing for developing countries, but it's just something to keep in mind. Tether is not Bitcoin. So you're not going to find the sovereignty that you would if you're taking Bitcoin into self-custody. If you have Tether on a wallet, they can freeze it, they can seize it, and again, it doesn't really change things. It doesn't really move the revolution forward, in my opinion. I would say it just gives a little bit more life to the fiat system. So there's things that I like about it. There's things that I'm not a fan of. I think it inherently is beneficial to Bitcoin. People could say that's unpopular. But I'll say is, like, don't leave your money in Tether. Leave your money in Bitcoin. That's where you'll find sovereignty. You won't find sovereignty in Tether. But I understand if you're in Argentina. I understand if you're in Turkey and you don't have an option and you want an option to get a stable fiat currency or that type of exposure. You don't have another option. So anyways, I'm really curious. Mitchell, what do you think about this, man? Isn't it crazy that he made a speech at the Bitcoin conference talking about this?
Yeah, you bring up really good points. And what I'm thinking is tyranny doesn't have to happen through the state directly. It can happen through private entities. And a great example of this is big tech censorship, right? They infringe on your First Amendment rights under the guise of, we're just a private business. We can do what we want. Now, they're a monopoly, right? Big tech, we've got Twitter and Rumble now competing, but if you flash back 4 years ago, every major platform was censoring people and was censoring important stories relevant to the election and C-19 and all this stuff, right? And it's because the government can't coerce them, right? They are centralized entities. If the feds come knocking on Mark Zuckerberg's door and say you have to censor certain stories and people online, he's going to do it, right? You could see the same thing enacted through Tether. So they don't need an outright central bank digital currency from the Fed, but they can coerce Tether into censoring certain people's addresses, under the guise of quote unquote illicit activity and the name of safety and all that. But we know these are just sort of mechanisms and things they say to get away with censorship and tyranny. So it can happen through the private sector, and definitely Bitcoin and Tether far different. I understand if you're not in America and you need access to dollars, like, it's a great resource, but ultimately your life savings should be in Bitcoin, not Tether, not fiat, not any other asset.
100%. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, man. Your life saving is beautifully put. Your life saving should be in Bitcoin. That's the only place you're going to find sovereignty, and it's because of Bitcoin's decentralized nature, right? And again, it's not that the Tether guys want to do this. It's that it's a centralized entity. They can't, if they want to remain in business and not be locked in a box, they have to comply. So, is it better than a CBDC? I would say yes, because it's a private entity. But at the same time, I think the cons are, it's helping maintain the fiat system in a way, because it is buying the US debt, so they can just continue, deficit spending. But, it's like there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons. So I'm kind of on the fence about this. Opti, what's your take?
All right, here we go. All right, well, I've been saying for a while that this anti-CBDC rhetoric we see from politicians really has no bite to it, because we already have them. They're called stable coins, or even further, the dollar is basically already digital. It's already a central bank digital currency. It's just not in that naming. So as a Bitcoiner, as someone that is not here to continue to perpetuate the fiat dollar, I am not a fan of Tether at all. I understand, their narrative or their shill, their projection here that like, hey, it's a stepping stone towards Bitcoin. I totally get that. I totally understand that a lot of people are really scared by the Bitcoin quote unquote volatility, and they want a quote unquote stable coin. And so I understand the psychology of people that want to get away from their local currencies and they want to maintain their purchasing power. And so they go into something that's stable, which is only stable until it's not. And so, of course, they go into Tether, and then hopefully eventually they end up at Bitcoin. Like, I totally get the mechanism going on here. But really going down the Bitcoin dollar thesis here, I'm not a fan of Tether being the 18th largest holder of U.S. Treasury, of U.S. debt. Like, I am not here to perpetuate the fiat dollar. I am not here to continue to perpetuate the fiat system. And as much as I understand the mechanisms behind Tether, it really just seems like, how do I put this in the best way possible? It really just seems like a continuation of what we're seeing out of the fiat system. What we're seeing from all of the institutions is they're all holding U.S. treasuries. Well, as long as someone's willing to hold the U.S. debt and basically continue to fund these perpetual wars, then we're going to keep and maintain the system as we see right now. And of course, I understand people wanting to go into something stable at first and eventually get into Bitcoin, but I'm a Bitcoiner. I want people to hold Bitcoin. I don't see the need to hold a quote unquote stable coin. But yes, I've been saying this for a while on the show, that we don't need a quote unquote CBDC coming out of the federal government. We already have them coming out of the private sector, and they are stable coins. And I think more people are starting to wake up to this. And shouts out to Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin, because they've been beating this drum for a long time now. And, this is the stuff that, like, I fundamentally think Bitcoin's going to win, but when I hear stuff like this is when I get, my spidey senses popping up, and I'm like, okay, where are the attack vectors coming from? And I think it is coming out of the private sector. Now we're seeing that the pendulum is swinging away from the public sector into the private sector, and the people in power will use the private sector whenever it fulfills their needs. And we're seeing that happen right now. And let's not forget that some of the biggest backers of Tether or stablecoins in general are the same people that back PayPal Mafia. Like, it's the same people. The very same people that are perpetuating the system that we currently are in and don't like are also the same people that are, backing Tether or USDC. Like, to me, stable coins, I don't know if I can say are a necessary evil, but this is where we are right now. We don't need a CBDC coming out of the federal government. We already have them. They're stable coins. And, Cantor Fitzgerald, or chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, basically said it himself. Though, with that being said, shouts out to the Tether team, because they have unlocked the infinite money glitch here. They buy a bunch of treasuries with the profits. They buy more Bitcoin. Like, it seems like a great business plan here. As much as I don't like treasuries and holding U.S. debt, because that's why we're in the position we're in, and I want more people holding Bitcoin. Dude, you can't hate the player. Like, they're racking it in right now. And so it is something to be aware of. And also, though, one last thing, Nico, we did hear Trump at that speech say that, he wants to perpetuate U.S. dollar dominance, and they're going to use stablecoins to do that. So we're seeing this play out. And if you've been aware of this, you've been seeing this play out for a while. And of course, we want more people holding Bitcoin, not stablecoins.
Yeah, I'm not as, it's not as black and white for me, just because I know that in the developing world, Tether is life-saving for so many people. And the reality is that Bitcoin's volatility is still could potentially, it's just too volatile to be used as a everyday. You can.
Hey, this dump hurts me too.
Bitcoiners do it all the time. Like we use it as a currency, like when Lightning transaction would buy a coffee and whatnot. But day to day, right? The dollar in the eyes of the developing world is king. And I would rather that be in the hands of a private entity than in the hands of the US government. And look, I'm a free market maxi at the end of the day. Ideally, as a Bitcoiner, I would want the developing world to use Bitcoin to transact on a daily basis. But that's not what the free market has indicated at all. What the free market has indicated is they're fans of Tether. They like using Tether, right? So, if that's what the free market is saying, I still believe that it's exposure to a non-local fiat currency, exposure to a digital currency. And I would say that's a good thing. So I don't think it's as black and white. I think we have to remain vigilant. We have to, tell people that, look, you're not going to find sovereignty by holding your wealth in Tether. But I still think it's a net positive overall, and that might be unpopular with people, but I see what it's done in the developing world. Anyways, everybody, let's get to the news. Lots to talk about.
The Daily News.
I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Foundation Devices. It's self-custody done right. They built a premium grade hardware wallet called Passport right here in the US. It's fully open source and verifiable. It's the most intuitive Bitcoin wallet designed with a UX reminiscent of a simple feature phone. So you will know how to navigate it and use it the moment you pick it up. Get your Bitcoin off exchanges and into your own hands in just a few minutes. Experience the peace of mind that comes with taking ownership of your own keys. After a massive sellout during Bitcoin Miami 2023, the Passport is back in stock at foundationdevices.com. Bitcoin only, open source verifiable, completely air-gapped security model, gorgeous design craft, premium grade materials. If you're thinking about getting your Bitcoin off exchanges, this is the one for you. Check out the Passport link in the show notes below to learn more. By the way, guys, you could use promo code SIMPLY and you'll get a discount on your Passport hardware wallet. Remember, guys, not your keys, not your cheese. You want to take sovereignty over your life, and the way that you do that is you put your Bitcoin into cold storage. And I can't recommend enough the Passport by Foundation Devices. It's a great hardware wallet. Anyways, everybody, so I do want to talk about this. We've been talking about Trump's speech for a while. It was a very historic moment on Saturday last weekend. It coincidentally also Simply Bitcoin's 4th anniversary. But before we get into it, guys, if you're enjoying the show, help us break 100 likes within the first hour of the show. So if you guys are tuned in on YouTube, Rumble, and X, smash the like button. Really helps with the algo. So the Orange Man said good things about the Orange coin at the Orange conference. And apparently, I'll let you guys hear it from the Orange Man himself.
But for too long, our government has violated the cardinal rule that every Bitcoiner knows by heart. Never sell your Bitcoin, right?
Isn't it crazy that like Bitcoin's influence has gotten to a point where you get a U.S. president basically, speaking about the Bitcoin ethos of, don't sell your Bitcoin. So of course he was doing this as a self-promotion, because he's basically saying, like, look, if you elect me into office, we're not going to sell Bitcoin. It's going to become a strategic reserve asset. And again, what I was mentioning in the beginning of the show, ladies and gentlemen, is that right after Trump had his speech, Cynthia Lummis came on stage and she had it in her hand. She had the papers of the bill, but it was yesterday that it was finally introduced. Here's the official press release from the Cynthia Lummis website. It goes on to say, Lummis introduces strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation following her announcement, a historic proposal to supercharge the US dollar and pay down the national debt by establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Today, U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis officially introduced the Boosting Innovation, Technology, and Competitive through Optimized Investment Nationwide Act, which stands for Bitcoin if you break down the letters, in the U.S. Senate. Quote, as families across Wyoming struggle to keep up with soaring inflation rates and our national debt reaches new and unprecedented heights, it is time for us to take bold steps to create a brighter future for generations to come by creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Quote, Bitcoin is transforming not only our country, but the world, and becoming the first developed nation to use Bitcoin as a savings technology secures our position as a global leader in financial innovation. This is our Louisiana Purchase moment that will help us reach the next financial frontier. The Bitcoin Act establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve to serve as an additional store of value to bolster America's balance sheet and ensure the transparent management of Bitcoin holdings of the federal government. Specifically, the legislation would establish a decentralized network of secure Bitcoin vaults operated by the Treasury Department with statutory requirements ensuring the highest level of physical and cybersecurity for the nation's Bitcoin holdings. Implement a 1 million Bitcoin purchase program over a set period of time to acquire a total stake of approximately 5% of total Bitcoin supply, mirroring the size and scope of gold reserves held by the United States, be paid for by diversifying existing funds within the Federal Reserve System and Treasury Department, affirm self-custody rights of private Bitcoin holders, and emphasize the strategic Bitcoin reserve shall not infringe upon individual financial freedoms. And also shout out to Nick Carter for pointing this out. Proof of reserve is mentioned. What is proof of reserve? Proof of reserve is exactly what El Salvador did. So what did El Salvador did? Say, listen, we're making our reserves public. It's an open ledger. Anyone could verify it. And that's in stark contrast with how Fort Knox functions. You have to take the U.S. government's word for it that the gold is really there. I think the last time a picture was taken of the gold at Fort Knox was back in the 1970s. Is the gold really there? I don't know. We have to take their word for it, right? So I think that's a step in the right direction. And here's David Bailey, CEO of BTC Inc., which throws the Bitcoin conference and Bitcoin magazine. And he says, I actually think that the game theory on the Lummis SBR bill is fairly interesting. I think we should lobby for it at full throttle. It's a litmus test for those for who is with us and who's against us. And whoever becomes the blocker will draw the full ire of our community. It unites Bitcoin and crypto, and it unites industry and retail. There's political cause for a Republican to support it, and there's no strong lobby pushing Democrats to block it. It will mobilize the grassroots, get out the vote effort as well. I mean, I do agree with that. And something that I'll say that I said in the beginning of the show, like, it would suck ass if Kamala Harris won the election from a Bitcoiner's perspective. Because now, we've as a community, as an industry, we've put our weight behind RFK and Donald Trump, and the Democrats did not choose to make an appearance at the convention. They've been kind of walking it back with words, not really with actions. So, I mean, if they get back into power, like Operation Choke Point 2.0 is going to increase by like 2 times. So, it sucks that it's become partisan in this sense, because ideally Bitcoin isn't partisan. Bitcoin is for everyone. Bitcoin supports a lot of progressive causes, as it supports a lot of conservative causes. So ideally, it sucks that we're in that type of situation. But in regards to the bill itself, I think it's incredibly bullish from a number go up perspective. From a revolution perspective, I can care less whether the U.S. government has Bitcoin or not. I would say, I would rather have individuals having, and they do, have the majority line share of Bitcoin rather than a nation state, which is the case right now. And hopefully you guys understand that if you're selling Bitcoin at the moment, you're probably selling it to BlackRock, which essentially belongs to the U.S. government. So I would say, don't sell your Bitcoin because you're probably selling it to a government directly or indirectly. And, I guess this is bullish for price. Like, imagine if they came out, this law passed, and they're like, it just comes out, New York Times, CNBC, U.S. government to buy 1 million Bitcoin. What do you think would happen to the price, bro? Shit would go to the moon. And then what do you think other countries would do, like China, like Russia, like a lot of countries in Europe? They're competitors of the United States. They would have to match that and say, look, we're going to start buying Bitcoin too. So it's very positive from a number go up perspective. I would say it's a negative from a revolution perspective. And I can't emphasize this enough. And I'll pass it on to Mitchell. Mitchell, was it dumb of us to, put our hopes behind a partisan candidate? I would say we had no choice. They were attacking our industry. It created an opportunity for the Republican Party and the Independent Party to step in and say, you know what, we'll protect the rights of Bitcoiners. What's your take on this? Because specifically with Kamala gaining in the polls as she is.
Yeah, I don't think it's dumb. And I also agree, we didn't really have a choice. And if you would have told any of us 6 months ago, hey, Donald Trump is going to give this speech at the Bitcoin conference, we would have all been ecstatic, right? I think objectively, it's a good thing, and it was inevitable, right? Bitcoin, because politics, like you mentioned at the very beginning of the show, politics is based on power, and money is where power is derived from, right? And we are fundamentally trying to change the monetary system. So inevitably, money, Bitcoin, politics, it was all going to get blended together. And I will say, this Lummis bill is awesome. She's her, great job pushing this forward. But I would not want to be holding a Bitcoin ETF right now, and I wouldn't want to be holding Bitcoin on Coinbase. I would absolutely take self-custody if I hadn't already. Because think about 9 decades ago when they passed Executive Order 6102. They confiscated gold from private bank vaults, right? I can already see the headlines now. To support America's national strategic interests and the safety of our country, we have confiscated the Bitcoin under certain exchanges and replaced it with dollars. They'll pay you out in fiat, but they're going to take the Bitcoin. Maybe this is doomerish of me, but that could very well be a scenario that plays out. So absolutely make sure you take self-custody.
I don't think doomerish of you at all. I think you're learning from the past, right? What's the famous saying? If you don't learn from the past, you're destined to repeat it. Opti, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, so I read this bill this morning. I read the full PDF, and as much as the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve strategy is laid out in it, buy 1 million Bitcoin in the next 5 years. Of course, that's going to be good on the Bitcoin price. I thought there was some interesting points in there. Of course, the Nick Carter tweet pointed out, a proof of reserve mechanism like El Salvador. That would be absolutely awesome and completely different to what we see currently with the status quo. We joke about this all the time. Who knows how much gold is actually in Fort Knox? Obviously, trust them, don't verify, but apparently it's all there. So that would be profound in and of itself. The second thing that I found pretty interesting from actually reading the bill was that it seemed like they were proposing some multi-sig setup for all the different states, or at least all the different holders of it, which obviously would be not only very interesting, but the correct way to do this. So shouts out to Cynthia Lummis for doing that. But I think the best part about this was the very last paragraph, or the very last section of this, was continuing to double down on the idea of protecting self-custody. Though, of course, a lot of Bitcoiners would be like, I don't need a law to do this. I literally just, remember 12 words or 24 words and I'm good. But I think as we move further down the timeline and we move further into this clown world, some might argue peak clown world, I think it's going to be very important to have, as we said earlier, the guys with guns protecting our self-custody. This is property. I thought this was America. I thought we could own property here. And now it's getting to a point where they literally want to take your property from you because they don't like it, because they don't like freedom money. So I think this is a very good development. And we'll see if this actually, gets passed and put in, which would obviously break the echo chambers and really pump our bags. Of course, I don't even think they could buy 1 million Bitcoin right now. Currently, that's literally all the Bitcoin on all the exchanges ever, and that doesn't even account for the retail FOMO that's going to come afterwards.
They totally can. They just
I know.
They just need to pump the price to a certain extent where people are still willing to sell it.
Exactly. So I think it's definitely an important development that we're seeing. Of course, here, like we emphasize always, it's about the individual saving in Bitcoin. You guys stacking sats, taking Bitcoin into custody. This is how this game wins. This is how you as the individual really thrive. So, I mean, very interesting. Obviously, a historic moment at the Bitcoin conference with Cynthia Lummis coming out and exposing the bill to the world. And then, of course, her dropping the full bill a couple days later, which is, I think, a good development.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, let's hit the culture and talk to Mitchell Hoddle. Let's check it out.
The Daily Culture.
Everybody, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor. Of course, I'm talking about the Orange Pill app. The Orange Pill app is the Bitcoin social layer. Stack friends who stack sats. Join the 11,500 Bitcoiners that are currently on the app. To get started, scan the QR code or check the link in the video description. The Orange Pill app is a great resource for Bitcoiners who are traveling, you move to a new city, or perhaps you are in your city, you just don't know any Bitcoiners around you. Pull up the Orange Pill app. Has a really clever geographical feature. It will show you the Bitcoiners that are near you. It allows you to send them a DM and connect with them. It's also a great resource for Bitcoin events. So if you don't know any Bitcoin events around you, you pull up the Orange Pill app, it will literally show you. It's also the best way to communicate with me directly. I don't really answer Twitter DMs or emails these days, get flooded with those, but the Orange Pill app, I make sure about every week or so to check the Orange Pill app and to get back to every single one of you guys. So guys, download the Bitcoin social layer today, download the Orange Pill app, scan the QR code, or check the link in the video description. All right, man, I'm so excited. I'm so bullish on Zoomers. Like a lot of our team.
Well, the Zoomers that get it.
A lot of our team right now are just a bunch of hungry, savage Zoomers, and they're some of the most talented Bitcoiners I know. I appreciate them. I love them. And, just Mitchell Hoddle, man, just another extremely talented Bitcoin Zoomer coming in hot, trying to show off your talents, taking advantage of your youth to sprint faster than everybody else. So, yeah, man, how you doing?
I appreciate the kind words and love for my generation. And one of the most bullish things I saw this past week at the conference was I went to the Bitcoin Student Network event. It was put on by Arsh and Ella. It was great. Like probably, couple hundred college kids packed into this restaurant, like crazy bullish event. And I remember 3 years ago, I went to the Bitcoin 2021. It felt like I was the only person under 50 there. Like I was looking around, everybody's way older than me. And it was exciting, right? I'm like, wow, I'm one of the only people my age who actually starts to understand it. But we're seeing more, right? That our numbers are multiplying. And Zoomers, we have no other option, right? There's no other way to save for a house and to be financially secure, start a family, aside from Bitcoin. We're priced out of real estate. The stock market is just manipulated. It's rigged. It's also tied to liquidity, just like Bitcoin, and it underperforms Bitcoin, right? So you have two options as a Zoomer. You can go the sports gambling, meme coin, degenerate route, or you can go work hard, provide value for society, and save in Bitcoin. And that's the path I've chosen. And it's the one I'm trying to get all my friends on as well.
Absolutely.
Let's go, Mitch. I mean, when I saw you at the after party, I literally told you the same thing. I'm like, man, if I had Bitcoin at your age, like it would have been an incredible paradigm shift. So kudos to you and the young Bitcoiners that get it. But I do kind of want to pivot this conversation because I know this is a topic that Nico loves. I know this is a topic that you love. But let's talk about why you have leaned in so hard into the idea of Bitcoin and politics. And that's what you've been talking about. You wrote the book, Conservative Case for Bitcoin. So for all of the Bitcoiners watching right now, they're like, oh, politics is fake. Like we shouldn't care about politics. Bitcoin's going to win anyway. Why are you leaning so hard into politics currently?
One, I want people in my social circle, in my sphere, to understand Bitcoin. And I felt that articulating it from the conservative point of view was going to be one of the best ways I could do that. Two is that I was super into politics before I got into Bitcoin. I felt that we needed, like, the only way to make change was through legislation and getting the right people in office. Bitcoin changed my mind on that, but I've almost come full circle now that I want positive Bitcoin legislation, or at the very least, I think Bitcoin can win faster if we have neutral legislation. Like, I agree, ultimately Bitcoin wins regardless, just off of attrition. The dollar and the fiat system will kill itself through hyperinflation at some point. I don't know what the timeline is on that. But if Bitcoin has neutral policy, which, if you even look at Trump's language in his speech, right? He didn't say he's going to start buying a bunch of Bitcoin. He's like, we're not going to sell the Bitcoin we have. And that's great, because one of the most common FUDs I hear from no coiners or institutions, people, as to why they don't want to get into Bitcoin is, oh, the government's going to ban it. They're going to shut it down. Now, we understand that's not technically or physically possible, but that is a deterrent for a lot of people. And so having political favor or political neutrality on Bitcoin is a great thing. And, someone's got to do it, right? I feel over the last few months, like I want to step up, like it's in a way my calling, because there's a lot of really, really smart people in Bitcoin, but there's also a lot of computer nerds, like people who aren't super articulate and can't really, kind of rizz up these, these politicians, right? If you observe Bitcoin online, right, it's like cartoon people with laser eyes yelling at each other. But, you go to one of these actual events in person, it's good to have, people who can talk about Bitcoin, who understand it, and are willing to sort of do the dirty work and get into the swamp and get their hands dirty and advocate for Bitcoin.
100%.
I mean, look, I've definitely come full circle too. I came to Bitcoin apolitical. Obviously, Bitcoin as a movement is political. It's apolitical money, and we all know politics is downstream from the money printer. So Nico used to yell at me all the time, like, bro, politics are super important where we are right now. And I'm starting to come around on the idea of, like, I think it's super important for us young people to get involved, because in 10, 20 years, all the boomers are going to be gone. And we need people that are Bitcoiners in these positions and actually doing things that are going to help and protect Bitcoiners and Bitcoin industries, because it's going to be one of the biggest industries in the world. And if you have people fighting it, it's not going to be a good look for us. So this is where we are. Anyways, Mitchell, I do also kind of want to tap your brain on just Trump embracing Bitcoin and how that's broken this echo chamber that we've all been a part of.
Yeah, I hear a lot of criticism. Oh, Trump being pro Bitcoin is going to instantly turn off half the country. And I got a few points on that. One, good for them. Good riddance. If you cannot come to your own formulate your own opinion, you simply take the opposite of what the former president takes, then, you have fun staying poor, right? And on the other side of that, you're going to have a bunch of people that, by virtue of Trump being pro Bitcoin, will now immerse themselves and maybe either take a position or be a little more open, right? You're going to have half the country who's like, hey, I like Trump, whatever. I'm going to maybe learn more about this Bitcoin thing. And I think people had really high expectations going into his speech, and a lot of people were left disappointed, right? I do think his comment at the end about have fun playing with your stuff was like a little out of pocket, and shows maybe he doesn't fully understand Bitcoin. But overall, I think it's great. It's objectively bullish. He wants to free Ross. He wants to hold the Bitcoin that we already have, right? It was really good. And if you told anybody in the past, give them a transcript, go back and time travel, we would have all been ecstatic about this. And maybe he doesn't fully understand Bitcoin. That's okay. It shows that his appearance here and his willingness to promote Bitcoin and position himself as favorable, it shows that we have enough capital, enough influence as a Bitcoin community that the politicians now have to appeal to us, right? He doesn't have to fully get Bitcoin. He doesn't have to be able to explain self-custody and the difficulty adjustment and the differences between Bitcoin and crypto and Austrian economics. He doesn't have to understand all that. All he has to do is basically leave us alone or give us very favorable legislation.
100%. 100%. I couldn't agree more. I that's what I was saying at the conference. I'm like, I was a little disappointed with the speech. I'm like, all he had to say is just like, I'm leaving you guys alone and I like Bitcoin. And I would have been like, yep, that's my guy right there.
And RFK set the bar high, right? With his hyperbolic statements about, I'm going to buy $4 million or 4 million Bitcoin, which, as we know, would bid the price to the moon. I don't even think there's that many on exchanges. It couldn't happen. But because, no disrespect to him, he's not necessarily a candidate that's really contending. I enjoy hearing him talk. I think he's a great guy, whatever. But he's not going to win, right? He can say these things. Trump can't just go on there and say, we're going to buy 4 million Bitcoin. It's not feasible, and it just wouldn't make sense for him politically. So the bar being set that high, I think, definitely had people disappointed. But overall, I think it was great. And I do think it was maybe the order of, having Lummis come on right after, because it was a little odd because everybody had left and I felt like her announcement got a little overshadowed. But overall, I couldn't be more bullish on Bitcoin and definitely America's Bitcoin position, because I love America. I grew up here. I'm never going to live in another country, and I want us to lead the way on Bitcoin. And we have the most capital in this country, right? If we want Bitcoin to really experience number go up and all get our Lambos and our beach mansions, like we're going to have Wall Street and the political realm embrace Bitcoin and pump our bags.
100%. 100%. Guys, if you guys are enjoying the show, help us break 100 likes. We got 7 seconds and we're at 98. I know you guys can do it. But yeah, man, it's bittersweet. I would say I think it's naive from a lot of Bitcoiners to believe that inevitably we weren't going to get to this point. It is incredibly naive. Because that's like the current thing. It's like, fuck the state, like end the state. It's like, yeah, dude, I agree with you. I agree with the theory from the sovereign individual. I do believe information technologies is going to make the role of the state smaller. But, you know, to just believe that somehow we're going to go from A to B, you know, and it's going to be all dandy and all happy and all that stuff. Like, no, it's never been like that through human history. Every kind of pivotal moment, I think the one to compare with is the separation of church and state. That shit was so fucking bloody. Like take a look, just read a little bit about the French Revolution and see what the fuck happened. Like it was pretty nasty for a long time, and then that led to the Napoleonic Wars. Like it was a very turbulent time. Now I'm not saying the separation of money and state is going to be as violent. I don't think it is, but just to kind of give you guys an idea of like things aren't black and white. Like, you know, like it's different shades of gray. And during this transition period, we have to be flexible and we have to be quick on our feet and adapt to the situation and the circumstance that's in front of us. Bitcoiners always took this non-political neutral approach, and then they started attacking us, right? And then we were like, what the F is going on here? That created an opportunity for political opponents to make that part of their, if you vote for me, I'll protect your industry. Like that was the natural course of things. You know, I know it's the first time you experience it, you can't believe it. You're like, no, like this is crazy. And I understand and I respect a lot of OG Bitcoiners that have been here since 2013, 2011, when Bitcoin it didn't even exist, right? So I can't even imagine what that's like, you know, seeing, you know, an ex-president or potential future president saying like, you know what Bitcoiners say, like, don't sell your Bitcoin. Like it must be a little bit crazy. I understand that. But at the same time, we have to be realists. Like we want the men with guns to be pro Bitcoin. We don't want the men with guns to be anti Bitcoin. Does that mean that Bitcoin needs politicians to succeed? Absolutely not. I would say politicians need Bitcoin to succeed, but that's not to say that you can't make an argument. You can't look at me with a straight face and tell me that, Nico, Trump winning is somehow bad for the Bitcoin industry in the United States. Like you can't look at me and tell me that. So if you can't look at me and tell me that, then you can say for a fact that Trump being elected or RFK being elected is a net positive for the industry in the US. And if that's the case, then take agency, take action, right? And get involved somehow, right? That's my take. I understand that it could be incredibly unpopular with a lot of hardcore anarcho, like, you know, utopian, there will be no state, fuck the state, no matter what. But that's my opinion. Opti?
Yeah, I mean, look, I do believe in those same ideologies that I think on a long enough time frame, you know, Bitcoin will erode the huge government that we currently find ourselves in. But I think in the short term, like people, you know, like Nico, like Mitchell, and all the other Bitcoiners that are engaging with politics is super important because, hey, this isn't gonna crumble in the next 4 years. Remember, it took the Roman Empire, like 1,000 years to really erode. So it might crumble, but it might be after our lifetimes. And hence why I'm like, yo, I think Mitchell gets it. I know Nico gets a lot of flack because he's starting to notice the political game and be like, guys, we need to be proactive. So I do want to pivot that for a moment. Mitchell, from your perspective, from the Zoomer perspective, from the political stance you are taking, what do you think needs to happen from Bitcoiners? What are you doing personally to effectuate change?
I think most Bitcoiners don't really need to do anything. I think you need to continue to provide value for society, and accumulate Bitcoin, right? Keep doing what you're doing. If you want to get involved, I think the lowest hanging fruit is to get involved with your local officials or your state officials, right? Because the United States is decentralized. There's 50 states. Chances are you're not going to be able to really change minds of the people in Washington, D.C., but you can meet the people running for governor in your state. You can meet the people running for state offices, right? And they are more close and in physical proximity and in terms of just emotional capacity to their constituents, right? They live in this state. They have your best interest in mind. I tend to believe. I don't think state offices are nearly as corrupt as the federal office. So, lobby your local politicians, right? Make sure they're pro Bitcoin, because that's where you can really get change. And the more states that adopt, the right to self custody, right to mine, right to run a node, and anti-central bank digital currency, if once you get over half the states doing that, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the federal government to do the same.
100%. And it's kind of like, look, like it fundamentally, Bitcoin is a grassroots movement, right? And we've heard this many times, especially if you tune into Simply Bitcoin, which is the long walk through the institutions, right? And you can make the case that's how, the left, the current political left, took over a lot of the institutions. There's a lot of this conservative argument that you hear a lot. Whether you believe it or not, apply that same logic towards Bitcoiners infiltrating institutions in various levels of government, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if you had a Bitcoin US Treasury Secretary? Wouldn't it be awesome if you had a Bitcoin president? It'd be great, because all of a sudden their incentives are aligned with yours. And then this goes back to the fundamental battle here, which is the party of green, the party of fiat versus the party of orange, right? Because that's really what's going on here, right? It's not a red, blue, liberal, conservative. It's, are you pro Bitcoin? Are you anti Bitcoin? If you're anti Bitcoin, you're essentially inherently pro central banking, pro fiat. So anyways, it's been a great episode. Really enjoy it. Mitchell, if you had any last words for the audience, what would they be?
Yeah. This may be an out-of-pocket take, but a trend I think that's going on now and will continue to happen is Bitcoin's going to box out the radical left, right? So we saw last week a ton of stuff went down last week and got overshadowed. 10 Democrat congressmen signed a letter supporting Bitcoin and encouraging their Democrat colleagues to do so. And I think the primary reason why the Democratic Party has taken an anti-Bitcoin stance is because their mouthpiece is far left radicals like Elizabeth Warren. Climate hysteria, anti-freedom, like lockdowns, all this stuff. And I think they're going to get boxed out, right? Because, your normal sort of moderate Democrat, entrepreneurial type, Silicon Valley type, they're pro-Bitcoin. They're pro-technology. They see that this benefits America. It's good for reducing carbon emissions. It's good for the individual and the worker, right? And so I think those types of people in the Democratic Party are actually going to start to rise up and take the reins and sort of push the far left Elizabeth Warrens out, which I think is great for America. And I think that's really good for Bitcoin as well.
Absolutely. And then also, like, another thing is that it exposes incentives, right? So, like, a lot of the tactics that certain political parties use is they'll hide behind a noble cause. And that noble cause is the revolution. So it's not inherently that they believe in the things that they're touting. It's that what they'll do is they'll hijack those causes in order to achieve a certain political end goal. The beauty of Bitcoin is that it exposes incentives. So like someone like Elizabeth Warren, who talks a big game about equality and inclusivity, right? And Bitcoin is the most, inclusive, equitable money the world has ever seen, right? That protects the lower middle classes from the ravages of inflation. How are you going to dispute that, Elizabeth Warren? It exposes her as a fraud. You weren't actually interested in those things. You were using those things in order to garner more power. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it exposes incentives, tyrants of all kinds, right? So yeah, I completely agree. That's a really good take, Mitchell. Anyways, everybody, this was Simply Bitcoin Live for August 1st, 2024. I'm your host, Nico. This is my co-host, Optimus Fields, and our guest for today, Mitchell Hoddle. If you guys enjoyed the show, you know what to do. Smash the like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. We'll be back tomorrow for a brand new episode of Simply Bitcoin Live.
Episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, on a mission to enable independence.